All right, welcome back. So today we're going to take a look at the menu settings inside of a DSLR. Now, the menu settings are going to be very similar between DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. So if you do have a mirrorless camera, though, the configuration of the menu and maybe some of the wording might be different, but basically all the principles are going to be very similar. Even if you don't have a Canon DSLR, you have a Nikon DSLR or a Sony camera, a lot of this stuff is going to be exactly the same. Now, even between Canon cameras, the menus might vary a bit. But a lot of the main items that we have inside of the menu that I'm going to have you set up are going to be exactly the same. But we're going to go scroll through here and we're going to take a look at all the different settings and what they mean inside of your camera. I'll tell you whether they're helpful, not helpful, whether I use them or whether I don't use them. If I do, I'll tell you kind of the pros and the cons of them and then let you make your own decisions. So this is going to be the main menu that comes up. You can see we have a bunch of different tabs, and then within each tab we have different screens. So this first one gives me the options, and then when I click on the next one, it's going to give me some more options. So we're going to go ahead and start off with image quality. Now my camera comes with 2 card slots. So it has a compact flash card and an SD card. I am a huge fan of dual card slots. I personally would not buy a camera with only 1 card slot, and the reason for that is if you're ever shooting something important and one of your cards fail, I always have images as a backup on the secondary card. Now you can see in this case I am shooting RAW on both of my cards. I don't have to have RAW on both. We can easily change that information. Let's go to the next screen here. So you can see this is card 1 and this is card 2. Then we're going to go over to the next. Now these are the options that I have. Now I have mine both shooting full-sized RAW images, but I could have one shoot a large RAW, a medium RAW, or a small RAW. And these are some of your JPEG options. So this is kind of like the higher quality, and this is the more compressed. And this is a large file, then medium, then small. Now, I'm a big fan of shooting RAW, but if you wanted to save space or time and speed up your camera, shooting RAW and JPEG is definitely an option. RAW gives you a whole lot more options. It shoots higher bit rate and gives you a whole lot more control over your image. And if you're unsure what RAW means, we'll be going into that in the future. So let's go ahead and move on. So the next thing I have the option to set is what's called image review. So after I take an image or a series of images, the last image that I took will be displayed right here on this LCD screen. And at this setting, it will stay up for 2 seconds and then go off. Or I could have that so it doesn't happen. I could have it so it stays up for 4 seconds, 8 seconds, or on hold until I release it. Beep. So this is for your autofocus. When you focus and the camera thinks it's in focus, it goes beep. Lets you know that it's done focusing or it's focused on that subject. That doesn't mean that it's correctly focused, just that the camera thinks it's been correctly focused. So if you like the beep, you can keep it on. If you don't like the beep, you can turn it off. Release shutter without card. So this means that even if I don't have a card in the camera, I can take a picture and it will display on this LCD. Now, you need to make sure though that when you're doing this, you don't just start shooting and then you get done and then you realize that none of your images were able to save because you didn't have a card on the back of your camera. I have mine on because it does let me kind of preview the situation to see what it looks like. And then I usually put my cards in after that. I've never run into the issue where I've taken a whole bunch of photos and forgot to put my cards in. Now I forgot to bring my cards, but I've never forgot to put them in my camera. Lens aberration correction. Right now I have the 35mm 1.4, and so this is just going to help fix some of that lens aberration that you can get on lenses. So you can see right here, this is what the menu would look like. So you can enable it or disable it. So we have some external speedlight controls. I have mine enabled so that an external flash will work. If you turn that off, you stick a flash on your camera, it's not going to work. Evaluative meter, any of this stuff you can kind of go through and fix and set any of this stuff. want. So flash, spink in AV mode, automatic. It's doing exactly what it says. You have the ability to come in here and turn stuff on and off. Truthfully, this is by default. I didn't change any of this stuff. Mirror lockup. By default, it's on disabled. So mirror lockup means that it's going to automatically lock your mirror up. Now, when you do this, you won't be able to look through your optical viewfinder, but a lot of times people don't want the movement of the mirror locking up a lot of times in a situation when you're doing something like a long exposure. So they will actually enable this so that your mirror pops up. So then it's just your shutter opening and closing. But 99% of the time, you're going to have this on disable. Exposure compensation or bracketing. So what this is going to do, the first one for exposure compensation, if you're on an automatic mode, this is going to allow you to tell the camera to automatically over or underexpose by a third of stops. So when you take a picture, it will meter and automatically over or underexposed depending on where you set it. So you right now mine's at even, but if I went to this one, it would overexpose. If I went to this one, it would underexpose. Then you have a bracketing situation. Auto bracketing will take a series of photos where you purposely take one underexposed, even, and overexposed and allow you to combine that. That's used in HDR photography. If you're familiar with that, auto bracketing is something that you can set up. Now, some of the lower end cameras don't have that and you have to manually set it. So you can see right here, here's the exposure compensation, and it's going to allow me to kind of move left or right, whether I want to overexpose or underexpose something. And this is for my auto bracketing. So what I've done is I've told my camera that I wanted to take 5 photos when I auto bracket, and that's a completely different area of the menu. But now it's going to underexpose by 2 stops, 1 stops, even, +1, +2. So that's what that's meaning for auto bracketing. This is showing my ISO speed setting. So right now my camera is at 320 is what it's saying. And my speed range is from 100 to 25,600. The auto ISO range is 100 to 12,800. Minimum shutter speed in automatic. Now you can go in here and change this. A lot of cameras kind of have high +1, high +2, where it will extend that range. So if you do want to extend your range, you could click on one of these and select it and tell it to go up to faster ISO range. In here are the boxes, and this is where you would change that information. Auto lighting optimizer. Now I have this disabled. This comes enabled by default. And what this does is try to automatically fix some of your exposures. Like if you're having dense shadows or your highlights are kind of blown out, it tries to fix everything. Now, I don't want this to happen. I want to do this myself in post-production. So I turn this off, and that would be my suggestion, to turn this off on both Canon and Nikon. I do not white balance in camera because I shoot RAW, and this allows me to do all my white balancing post-production. Once again, if you do shoot JPEG or video, you definitely need to white balance your camera. So this is auto white balance. This is for daylight. This is kind of in the shade. This is cloudy. This is for tungsten light. This is for fluorescent light. This is for flash. This is for auto white balance, and this is to automatically set your Kelvin temperature. The next thing that we have is white balance shift. What this could be used for is just if your natural white balance is off a little bit. If you take pictures all the time and your auto white balance is a little bit yellow, you can shift this over to make it a little bit more blue. So instead of having kind of this yellow tinge to it, it's blue. And you can set this in your camera. You can clear this off, but that's basically what's going to happen. So if you notice that your image is too magenta or too green, you can come in here and shift that around so it's a little bit more accurate. Now, this is a really important setting if you shoot JPEG. If you shoot RAW, it doesn't make a difference because you're going to apply this after the fact. But you have 2 options. By default, your camera comes in sRGB. But as you see here, I have an Adobe RGB base. Color spaces are super important in photography, And the reason that I have the Adobe selected versus sRGB is that Adobe is a larger color gamut, meaning that it's going to capture more colors than sRGB will. For that reason, I have my camera shoot in Adobe RGB. Now this is the next menu here. So you can see we're on a third menu. It's going to give us these options here. So the next thing that we have is in picture style. Now a lot of the basic cameras might not have picture style. We'll just kind of come over here. Now mine's been customized and adjusted. By default, you're going to have an auto, a standard, a portrait, a landscape, a neutral, a faithful, and then I have a few more even below this that I've loaded into the camera. And then you can come in here and adjust this stuff. What you're getting the ability to adjust is kind of sharpness, contrast, color, saturation. So I'm adjusting mine to how I want to shoot. This is really helpful when you shoot video. In RAW, obviously I can change any of this stuff in post-production. But if you're shooting JPEG or a movie, this is really helpful. This is going to determine how your image is going to look when it comes out of the camera. So long exposure noise reduction, mine is on disabled. And the reason for this is, once again, I'm going to do this in post-production. I'm going to have the computer do the noise reduction, not in camera. So high ISO speed noise reduction. We've got standard, low, high, disabled. So if you are using noise reduction, you can set the amount. Highlight tone priority. Now what this means actually is if highlight is sort of blown out, it's going to adjust your image so that it has a little bit more detail and tonal gradation into it. I'm not a big fan of this. Once again, I'm going to do this in post-production. You can see down here, improves gradation in bright image areas or highlights. Dust delete data, obtain data for removing dust using software. As you can see, I've never ever used it in my camera, but if it's something you're interested in, grab the manual, look it up. Next thing that we have here is for multiple exposure. This is going to allow you to take multiple frames on the same exposure. So if you wanted to combine a picture of a lake and a picture of your friend's head on the same frame, you're going to turn this on. Now by default, I have mine at disable. Now you have a variety of options inside of this on how you want it to work. Multiple exposure. So you have mine set to additive. You can change the number of exposures. It's set to 2, but if you wanted to use 3 or 4, you could obviously do that. Save source images, yes, meaning each individual image. Do you want me to save that as well? And continue multiple exposures. You just want to do it one time and then get out of it. HDR mode. Now, I don't do HDR in camera. I'm not a fan of it. HDR stands for high dynamic range. You can look it up on the internet. Allows you to take multiple images of the same situation and get an insane tonal and color value inside of that image. Now, the problem with this is it saves it as a JPEG in this camera. I would prefer to shoot it myself, save it as a RAW, and then I do this inside of Lightroom or Photoshop. It just comes out a whole lot better and you have a whole lot more control. All right, so the next series of items that we have all have to deal with live view. Now, live view, the mirror pops up in your camera and you're using an electronic viewfinder. You cannot see through your optical viewfinder. On this camera, you actually press this button up here, but basically however you would activate basically your movie mode. So what you'll get is basically a video image on the back of your camera, and you can compose and adjust anything that you need to. I have mine set up for enable. I do use this occasionally. I have situations where the camera's really low and it's hard to kind of get down and look through it, or if you're holding it up over your head, I can kind of hold it up but still see the back of the camera so I can sort of compose an idea of what I'm doing. Autofocus mode. So what autofocus mode do you use during live mode? In this case, this camera, you can focus and then stop. It cannot track and shoot video like the newer cameras can. The newer cameras, you can have it so it tracks and it will continuously autofocus as you're shooting video. In this case, this one doesn't work like that. So the difference between live mode and quick mode is during quick mode, the autofocus sensor is set to one shot mode, meaning that it kind of focuses and then quits. Now, one of the issues that you'll see with this is that it will be interrupted for a second while the autofocus mode is working. So I have mine in the default live mode. Great display. So what you're going to see on the back of your LCD is one of these grids. If you want a 3x3, 6x4, or any of these options, you can leave them. You can select one of them. I have this at default or off. Aspect ratio. So the aspect ratio that you want to see in the back of your camera. Now, it depends kind of what you're doing. In this case, since we're taking images in live view, we're not recording video, we're going to actually take pictures. I leave mine in 3:2 and I never actually change it. You can change the ratio if you like. It will allow you to see what you're doing. I always prefer to capture a full image. I can always crop down to one of these other ratios. Exposure simulation mode. So this is just enabled. This is going to give you an idea on the back of your camera what your image is going to look like. Silent live view mode. So there's a couple different options here. So there's kind of like a mode 1, a mode 2 where it's even more silent, and then disable. Now, since your mirror is up already, it's only the actuation of your shutter, and it's still just a little bit more quiet of a way to take a picture. Metering timer, I have mine set at 16 seconds, but basically you can go ahead and set this at whatever you would want. And that is it for the first section of menu settings. Next time, we're going to come back here and take a look at the autofocus settings. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you have any comments or questions, you can leave those below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe.